After the success of Cortex Strikes Back, Crash Bandicoot was unstoppable. The year is 1998, and there were already 2 Crash Bandicoot games on the PS1 selling phenomenally well. Crash 1 sold 1 million copies in its first year, and Crash 2 will go on to do the same. Crash Bandicoot was transcending into PlayStation superstardom. He had an abundance of toys, random merch, and even more spots on TV commercials. Our little Bandicoot was all grown up, and he could finally be considered PlayStation's unofficial mascot. Naughty Dog still hard at work going into their 3rd year straight of working on back-to-back titles, constantly growing, trying to improve Crash Bandicoot and pushing the PS1 hardware. But where do you go when you've already created one of the most well-received characters and gameplay formulas for your time? What's left to do when you've already reached what many consider to be the apex of your platforming gameplay? As developers working on the same thing for years in a row, how do you stay motivated? Well, if you're Naughty Dog in 1998, your answer to all of these questions is to make a game that's not about creating a name for yourself, a game that's not about refining a formula. Above all else, Naughty Dog decided to make a game that's about having fun. There's no point in keeping everyone in suspense. Crash Warped is my favorite Crash game. I believe this is Crash Bandicoot taken to a level he has not yet been to at the time and has still been chasing post Naughty Dog era. This game is full of beautiful environments, electrifying gameplay, and a soundtrack I could never forget. Is this game perfect? Of course not. We've all seen the criticism, and I've even been a part of it once upon a time. But after years of replaying these games every now and then, I've come to the realization that Crash 3 is my ideal Crash Bandicoot game, and the one I find the most fun to play in the series based on his own merit. If you've seen one of my other Crash videos, then you'll know how this goes. This video will first focus on Crash Warped as a game, along with discussions on its levels, improvements, similarities, differences to other games, and everything in between. Then we'll talk about story framing. Yes, I do talk about story in Crash games. And then a greater focus on problems in this game, with a bit more this time around. Let's spin our way into Naughty Dog's last Crash platformer and my personal favorite game on the PS1. You are watching a Crash Bandicoot Warped retrospective.
Crash Bandicoot Warped! Press start to begin. Crash, 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 why must you always muck in my mud? Oh look, I have a mask helping me too. We will find out which one is more powerful soon enough.
Crash Bandicoot 3. The task had to have been an exciting one. Even by today's standards, an opportunity to round off a gaming trilogy is still an impressive feat. There's a lot more potential when you're not working completely from scratch, and that's always been one of Crash 3's strengths when compared to the previous games. If I were to describe them, Crash 1 had a focus on inaugurating Crash's core gameplay formula. Linear course clear levels that shift back and forth between 2D and 3D perspectives with a very soft collectathon aspect mixed in. While it might have suffered from first game syndrome with all the little quirks it came with, it made for a very charming first outing for the franchise. While Crash 2 was a game about refinements, it improved and expanded its level design, along with Crash's model and animations, and overall set the standard and lifted the bar for core platforming in the series. Where it fell short was level variety. You went to so many identical level locations so often that the game truly became most reliant on its strength that it was a fantastic platformer. 2 games that understood their roles and met them admirably. So where does that leave Crash 3? Typically for a third game, you say the best thing to do would be to analyze the good and bad from the previous games, then take and improve where needed. Ironically, Crash Warped doesn't really do this. Well, not fully. Crash Warp is such a far cry from Crash 1 that looking at the two games side by side, you could almost assume them as different franchises. Naughty Dog clearly learned a lot from 1 to 3, but it's very apparent that they took the most from 2. Not saying that's a bad thing, of course. Strikes Back is the better game, there's no doubt about that. But it's fascinating how removed Warped is from the debut. Levels are still hallways, but they're extremely spacious. They're no longer the tight corridors they once were. Along with that, pits and gaps are used more strategically. Instead of the base levels being revolved around one giant chasm underneath very tiny platforms, levels have a base structure made up of a lot more solid ground to traverse on. This level philosophy in itself is something I've always found more appealing for Crash, and it removes this game from ever being as ridiculously hard as Crash 1 in the conventional sense. Instead of worrying about risking your life on the very narrow jumps, we get to enjoy exploring the wide array of colorful worlds and very new enemy types, and their many, many interesting death animations. Getting kissed by the frog used to really creep me out, I have no idea why. So yeah, Crash 3 feels a lot like Crash 2. Same Crash model, same moveset at the beginning of the game, same collectibles, well, as far as crystals and gems, even a warp room with a very familiar layout. 5 separate sections, all locked behind the progression of going through each level and bringing back at least a crystal from each location, then visiting a boss's world, defeating them in battle, and continuing to the next area. We're back to a very similar format. It's not the giant leap in art style and gameplay that was there from Crash 1 to 2. So where does the new come in? Oddly, the new comes with everything. Everything feels like it's gotten its proper upgrade, like it's been given 10 Wamba Fruit and has been juiced up right down to the core of the game. Even in the warp room, the Time Twister is this futuristic wider hub to run around in. It exists off in this pocket of space. It feels like its own dimension. Everything has a type of sleek and electrifying feel to it. It's nothing completely massive, it's still just a Crash Bandicoot hub. But what's important is the tone it sets. This game is about time traveling. The ancient temples we've become so used to from the first couple of games are gone. This hub is full of electric fences, big screens, and buttons that jet out of the floor that work as a level select. You can jump on a button and watch a portal come crackling open. You can actually get an idea of what the level you're about to go into might look like thanks to the art that was put on them. It's really cool to jump into portals and time travel into levels. I'd have to do some digging, but I'm 99% sure Crash Warp has my favorite level selection of any game. When you get into the levels, they're so grand. For contained hallway playable areas, they do a great job at feeling larger than life. From the beautiful medieval vista, the opening level Toad Village, to exploring the inside of Egyptian corridors filled with hieroglyphics, booby traps, and oil slicks in Toon Time. There are some pretty sick Arabic villages that are always a pleasure to bounce over and traverse. To electrified future cities with bright neon lights, laser beams, and enemies that I can't even describe. Future Frenzy is by far one of my favorite places Crash has ever been to. The energy here is like nothing seen in the trilogy, and it's the level I think of most when I remember this game. You're probably going to be rolling your eyes at this, but I actually like the vehicles for the most part. I know, Yorm, how could you? The vehicles and other activities really aren't that bad. Yes, a Crash Bandicoot game will always be at its best when Crash is platforming. I don't think anyone could ever argue with that. However, these breaks in between platforming I think serve a pivotal role in making Crash 3 stand out so well. Keeping everything from feeling tired flips the script a little bit on what could have been more of the same. That's why I find spice in Crash 3's variety. We're now scuba diving through underwater caverns. Yeah, that's right, Crash learned how to swim. Call me impressed. We're racing motorcycles on old desert roads for crystals. We're making a new friend out of Baby T in the prehistoric levels. How could you not like this little guy? What's really cool is that Crash no longer works alone. For the first time, Coco suits up and gets in the field. Makes it a lot cooler that you control this brother-sister team. Her introduction in Orient Express is brisk, but very memorable. Jumping at the portal as Crash, watching him faceplant to the ground, seeing Coco jump in without a second thought was ridiculously cool. All of a sudden, you're on the Great Wall of China as Coco riding a tiger. Pyrrha controls like a dream. Instead of quick bursts, Pyrrha has an all-out sprint you can use as long as you can handle it. His sprint added with a jump will have you flying through the level faster than you ever expected. It turns the levels he's used in into a complete obstacle course. Pyrrha is a joy to control, and while he may technically move better than Polar, I'm still picking Polar as my favorite. Coco doesn't just stop at tiger rides. She runs the whole gauntlet at Naughty Dog's new focus on gameplay. Wider areas of play with a single mission structure. Coco rides a jet ski through very spacious water levels. Are you seeing this? Coco is riding a jet ski in these wide open areas. They might not be completely free roam, the levels are sectioned off where they need to be, but you have so much control here it's mind-boggling. There's a blurb I really like from one of Naughty Dog's programmers, Stephen White. In Crash 2, Crash walks in water. At the time, it was inconceivable. There was actual team debate rather it was feasible. By Crash 3, there were whole jet ski levels that had everything floating in the water, with waves and real-time reflections. These levels are such a technical jump and shows Naughty Dog's growth and work ethic. They were always pushing to make Crash games bigger and better, so that when you went to a new game, it felt like the natural next step for him. It never got complacent and never gave more of the same. I've always admired that. Like in the airplane levels, they're not crazy complicated. You fly around and defeat whatever number of enemies there are and move on. It's always very brisk. The hunt for the gem doesn't even take that much time. Truly feels like Naughty Dog experimenting on bigger open areas. And if the studio would have continued with Crash, I really believe this is where the style levels were headed. Of course, we all know how that ended up. I just don't see why you completely hate the vehicles, at least on the first run through the levels. I could understand they're not your favorite, but despise them? You lost me there. For the most part, they control pretty well. I mean, the motorcycle is pretty janky. You can definitely tell that was probably the hardest vehicle for the developers to figure out. It's a real shame because Biker Crash is one of the coolest skins he's ever worn. In Hog Ride, the motorcycle isn't too bad, but by Road Crash, yeah, I could see someone breaking a controller or two. Seems like whatever vehicle gets the most marketing always sucks. Crash 2's jetpack really found a spiritual successor in Crash Warp's motorcycle. Oh boy. Crash always improves. From game to game, Naughty Dog always made sure that control of Crash was something that evolved. This was most present in Cortex Strikes Back. In Crash 1, Crash felt alright. He controlled well to a point, but he was a little slippery, he was a lot floaty, and he really couldn't do all that much. Just a jump and a spin. A very humble beginning. By Crash 2, everything was fixed. One of the most impressive leaps in the series. Crash's moveset was completely reworked. He became tighter to control, his jumps felt right, and he was given new moves that served a purpose. He could slide, crawl, body slam, slide jump, glitch high jump. Everything just felt really good, and there wasn't a reason to ever change it. So come Crash 3, nothing really happened as far as Crash's moveset. Why fix something that's not broken? I love that Naughty Dog knew this, though that wouldn't stop them from doing stuff anyways. Instead of touching up Crash's base moveset, Naughty Dog decided to follow the core theme of Crash Warp and just have fun with it. Power-ups were introduced. After defeating the boss, they each dropped one upgrade for Crash to take and use for the rest of the game. The power-ups to me have always been a welcome addition. The majority of them act as natural extensions of Crash's already learned moveset. The Super Body Slam adds a bigger AoE to Crash's Body Slam. I mean, yeah, that's not a huge upgrade. There's not too many places in the game where you need the Body Slam. I honestly just get more out of the visual flair it has, but it's a nice introduction to a power-up system. It's unobtrusive. By the time you get your hands on the double jump, you naturally become reliant on the power. This was always the next step for Crash. Let the player control even more verticality. It's one of those powers that once you have it, it's hard to go back to a time when you didn't, and seeing that pretty much every Crash platformer after this has a double jump, I'll say, yeah, this was a good time to add it. My personal favorite is the Death Tornado Spin. Why is this not in every Crash game going forward? I just don't see why you wouldn't bring it. The Death Tornado Spin, for all intents and purposes, should have become a series-defining move. Sonic has his spin dash, Mario has his high jumps. Crash's new thing should have really been the Death Tornado Spin. It's by far the most satisfying power in the game, and its progressional implications are great. Crash is now a spinning master. He's so good at it that he can literally hover in the air. That's amazing. It's such a perfect power for Crash. Before you know it, you're crossing these super wide gaps in a breeze. Combo it with the super shoes and double jump, and Crash all of a sudden looks like a free runner. He can just do stuff like this now. It's incredible. It's like he's all grown up. It has good utility offensively, it extends traversal. I bet if more enemies were designed around shooting projectiles, they could have crafted this power to spin back things like in the Cortex fight in Crash 1. I think the Death Tornado Spin has the most mechanical and stylistic potential of any of Crash's moves. I'm not joking. If I got to write a Crash Bandicoot game, I know exactly what powers are making it in. Crash also gets a bazooka. How neat. Out of all the powers, this is definitely the one that feels like they were just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what stuck. Anytime after defeating Engine, Crash can just pull out an entire bazooka out of his pants and fire it at enemies. It's pretty funny looking. Doesn't really add that much, but I won't say I don't like it. Crash has a gun, so yeah. There's really nothing like getting all the powers and playing back through the levels as Crash. It really feels like any limitations he's ever had are gone. A Bandicoot's true evolution. To go along with all of this, Crash 3 is just a more polished experience. I'm talking a box counter that actually shows how many boxes you need to break, bounce crates only needing 5 hits instead of 10, real-time shadows, and by today's standards, I guess you could consider these crisp clear reflections ray tracing? Guess Crash was way ahead of the curve. We also got full analog control, baby, no more of that 8-directional mess. Kind of a weird thing about me is that I always play retro Crash games with the D-pad. It just feels right, in a nostalgic way, I guess. Levels had their maximum distance greatly increased. I think Naughty Dog was most proud of this. If you do pick Toad Village as your level 1, then your first impression of Crash 3 will be this shot of the castle way in the distance. My favorite improvement were the bonus rounds. It's like they were really on top of their game here. They work great as the fun breaks and levels that offer up a ton of extra lives they were meant to be. What I like the most is the way they're always connected to the rest of the level. There's so many times when you jump on a bonus round platform and it floats you to this section that's just off screen, allowing you to see the rest of the level in the background. For the most part, they feel like extensions to the level instead of loading to some offshoot area. I mean, some do load you away, but they're always aesthetically pleasing. All of this stuff, I think, are fun and welcome additions to an already working formula. A lot of people don't seem to share the same thoughts and opinions on Crash 3, and have soured a bit with time. There are too many vehicles, the powers are stupid and don't add enough to be warranted. The larger playable areas don't really amount to anything.
To be honest, I'd be lying if I said I didn't agree with some of that stuff.
But let me put something into perspective. Crash Warp is the highest rated game in the series. Now, I'm not using the actual rating to further my argument. I don't completely believe in video game ratings as a whole. I kind of think the whole system of rating games needs to be reworked a bit. But they do help in showing where everyone's headspace was at the time. This was the third Crash game in back-to-back years, and many people at that time considered this Crash at his best. Crash at his most fun. I wholeheartedly believe Crash 2 is the best platformer in the series. It's very obvious that that was the main focus in its creation. Naughty Dog wanted to prove to everyone and probably themselves that they can make a more solid platformer than the very rough Crash 1. I think they achieved it, but there really wasn't much area left to improve for a third game. Mind you, they were going into their third year working on the same IP. If you've ever worked on the same thing for too long, it becomes stale. You start to lose interest. It becomes a formality. I know this for a fact. While I haven't been a YouTuber very long, even working on the same video for a few weeks starts to weigh on me. So there's no way I could imagine working on something every day for years. This is why I think Naughty Dog adding all these extra bits and vehicles and power-ups is them trying to keep the zest in Crash 3 alive. I think it works. even from the viewpoint of a consumer. If Crash 3 would have just been Crash 2 with a couple of extra steps, I don't think it would have been perceived the same way. In the same sense, I don't think Naughty Dog would have had fun making it. I like Crash 3 because when I play it, I can just tell that people who worked on it got to experiment and have fun with the ideas they were able to bring to life. It's like Naughty Dog was finally able to create without limitations, and it led to one of the best paced platformers I think I've ever played.
Why must you continue to be a thorn in our side? What? Where was I? Tiny was a good fellow. He hated everyone and everything, but a good heart nonetheless. Please be more reasonable with my minions next time.
If there's one thing Warped has, at least before the first credits roll, is really good pacing. It's such an easy game to throw on and blitz right through. Playing for this video, I was shocked how well everything flows. I started up the game, played for a bit, looked up and realized I was already fighting in Trophy. I played over half the game without even realizing it. I think Warp's excellent pace stems from the story and setup. This game copied the trend Crash 2 started and picked up right where the second game ended. After you helped Brio collect the gems, he used their power to shoot down Cortex's space station. In a bit of contrivance, the bits of space station managed to fall back down to the Earth, destroying the very tomb of the entity that was giving Cortex directions on how to take over the world, Uka Uka. And just a little bit more contrivance. Uka Uka happens to be Aku Aku's brother. Now, obviously, there's a lot of moving hoops here, but if it helps Aku Aku become a more fleshed out character, I'm all here for it. He's like this father figure to the Bandicoots now. They're at home, relaxing, enjoying the peace they've earned in the second game. Then suddenly, something happens.
Uka Uka is free. No, it cannot be. Evil, great evil has come.
Uka Uka hasn't been free but only for a couple of moments, and yet his twisted energy has already caused a disturbance. Uka Uka is an interesting character to introduce, with him being the evil version of the mask we come so used to having in the first two games. Outside of the Japan releases, Aku Aku hasn't been really what I would call a character. He was pretty much relegated to a collectible that makes funny noises. Though here he is in Warp, a full-fledged symbol of good. I like to think that his character couldn't have made this jump without Uka Uka existing. Together these two make up this yin-yang parallel. They're good and evil. They're two sides of the same coin. Aku Aku brings a real sense of comfort. The Bandicoots always look so relaxed in the scenes he's in. It's like you can imagine this is how they spend their free time, enjoying each other's company. There's a trust shown when Aku Aku feels something isn't right and runs into the house. The Bandicoots follow right after. He gives them the lore of the situation by the fire, and they believe every word and follow him to the Time Twister, ready to take on anything Cortex and Uka Uka might throw at them.
Now, free once again, he must be stopped.
I love the way he speaks to Crash and Coco, always referring to them as children. It's like Aku Aku is this loving parent figure in the game, and it makes picking up a mask crate all the sweeter. In perfect contrast, Uka Uka is relentless. He has Cortex pleading for forgiveness for his past failures. This scene's implications have always been crazy to me. Here we have the smartest and most dangerous man on the planet, and he's groveling desperately. At this point, you've never seen Cortex like this. You've seen him fail, but he'd always come back. But that look of genuine terror on his face was new. It painted Uka Uka as the true threat. This was a new type of evil. This mask silhouetted in darkness with an evil glowing aura and truly demonic voice.
But since your bumbling has managed to set me free, I am feeling generous. There is still a way for us to amass the power needed to enslave this miserable planet. And this time the great Uka Uka will make sure that you do it right!
Clancy Brown was on top of his game with these voices. If I was scared of Cortex in Crash 2, then I was terrified of Uka Uka and Warped.
Crash and Coco are tasked with using the Time Twister to go back in time and collect crystals before Cortex and Uka Uka can get there and do the same. With this premise, there are pretty much zero limitations on where you can go, which leads to the richest level variety yet. Levels have such a wide range of possibilities. You literally go back in time to the prehistoric era, running away from dinosaurs, riding baby T-Rexes, and getting flown away by pterodactyls to the bustling future. Crash can now go to all these types of levels, and it's not forced. The natural progression of the story sees Crash and Coco go to so many interesting locations, and it really pays off. Just look at the first 5 levels, by far the strongest opening selection of the 3 games, and only 2 of them are platform focused. Toad Village is an excellent introduction and easygoing platform level with a warm, grand feeling. Then you make a complete 180 and go directly into Under Pressure. You swim deeper and deeper into this water cavern. You ride the jet sub and fight against sharks, eels, pufferfish, and electronic underwater traps. It's a complete shift in mood and regularity for the series, and it keeps going because minutes later, you're on the Great Wall of China as Coco riding a tiger. These fun, tight controls, this upbeat music, these wide distances. There's dragons here, you're having a grand old time. And it's here just when the player might start to worry the game might be too outlandish, so they pull you right back in with Boneyard. Before you know it, you're back to a traditional Crash level. Naughty Dog knew exactly where to lay off the gas, and they chose the best level for it. Boneyard is fantastic. It's one of the most dynamic levels in the series. It has your classic Crash chase segments you become so used to, except now there's finally a healthy mix of everything: side-scrolling, forward progression, and bonus rounds. Contrary to what Naughty Dog initially thought, I think Crash looks great platforming around lava. It oddly doesn't blend too harshly on Crash with his fur. Making Waves makes for a fantastic bookend to this early group of levels, by far the most impressive looking level. It plays for a really fun vehicle with Coco's jet ski. I'd say it has a really good pace with its box locations not being too out of the way, and control feels exactly the way you want it to. The perfect finale to this early set of levels that all offer up something interesting in their own way. It sets the tone for a beautiful paced game, and it really continues going forward for the most part. That pace is also helped through the game's story. Unlike Crash 2, you aren't constantly stopped coming out of levels for cutscenes. Enemies like Cortex and the bosses do stop to interject with a threat, but is always on the way to a level, helping the interactions feel a lot more natural. I love getting to actually see the bosses get a chance to speak and show off their character to you. Who would have thought that beast of a tiger that attacked you in the second game was capable of speaking?
Crash! Coco! Store the pretty crystals! Tiny, take them back! In Gladiator Arena!
Dingo Dial makes for an instant classic with his Australian accent.
Good day, mates. Dingo Dial's the name, and Uka Uka and Cortex gave me orders to bring the crystals to them during the Ice Ages. So give me the goods and shove off, or I'll roast yous.
His boss fight has always been one of my favorites. The fight kinda got dumbed down when you realized you can jump over his wall early and cheese the fight, but a favorite nonetheless. Entropy is probably the most interesting new character. As the creator of the Time Twister, he gives off the vibes that he'd probably have the most interesting backstory. He's like a living clock, a relic of the past, present, and probably the future. Defeating him actually upsets Cortex and Uka Uka. The Time Twister's creator is gone. It's a delicate device, and there's no one left to keep it in check. It's probably the reason the Time Twister implodes on itself. Pushed too far with no one left to contain its power, which is a pretty cool sentiment for a boss fight. Crash defeats powerful enemies like it's nothing, pretty casually. This is the one time it actually has an outside effect. Engine's fight is very cool. Well, depending on where you land on vehicles by this point in the game. For the first time, Crash takes a backseat while Coco takes on a boss. Coco vs. Engine, brain vs. brain. Two of some of the smartest characters in the series are going head to head in space. Engine showing off his new giant mech suit with a billion weapons on it, and Coco in her humble little pink spaceship. It makes for one of my favorite boss fights in the series. You hover over the moon with a space backdrop and Earth in the back. You dismantle Engine's mech suit piece by piece until you force him into a second phase. I find it really endearing that Pyrrha joins the fight to supply extra firepower. Okay, yes, Pyrrha is really cool. I love Polar, but he's never done anything like this. Maybe I'm a bigger Pyrrha fan than I thought. Together, you two put an end to what I think probably should have been the end of Engine boss fights. I don't really see how he ever comes back from a fight like this. Before you know it, you're back to a very familiar sight. A few levels and a couple of crystals are all that's standing in between you and the last obstacle. Cortex, like always, is waiting for you. Now, normally, I can rank Crash boss fights pretty well. Crash 1's Cortex boss fight is typically my favorite. The backdrop of the island, the setting, the stakes, the journey it took to get there is why I hold it so high. But Warped's Cortex boss fight is a different type of cool. You jump into that portal and head right into their base of operation. Turns out, the fight is a 2v2 along with the Mass Brothers, and it makes for such a fun fight. The theme here is my favorite part. For years, Aku Aku has done nothing but protect Crash, and now here, fighting against his brother, someone of equal power to him, he doesn't have a chance to check on you like he normally does. He can't let off in this fight for a single second. You're truly on your own because, for the first time, Aku Aku can hurt Crash. The mass fight is an obstacle while you deal with Cortex. They're shooting kamehamehas at each other, they're beam struggling, they're doing hand-to-hand combat, they're blowing up the map trying to one-up each other. Compared to this, you and Cortex might as well be tickling each other. You spin them a few times into some hole and Uka Uka picks them back up. It's not a bad fight. It has its typical Cortex moves with his ray gun and assortment of bombs. You can't spin back his shots anymore, which is a real shame, but it'd probably be hard with the Mass Brothers going at it the whole time. I'm serious when I say I spend way more time watching them fight than paying attention to Cortex. It's a real spectacle. It makes for one of the coolest looking boss fights and a darn good way to end off a trilogy, even if the victory you get is short-lived.
Well, you've crashed a few parties before, but I never expected you to make it this far. If you don't turn back, I will inflict 1,000 years of suffering on you and the entire universe!
Okay, it's very obvious I'm fond of Crash 3 at this point. Even with that being said, this game does fall short in some choice places, and given how many people these days try to write this game off entirely, I'm sure many people feel the same. You probably already know them by now, but let's run through the laundry list of problems. I like the vehicles, for the most part. At a base level, all their controls are up to par. Even saying that, there are just too many. Not including the engine boss fight, there are 16 out of 32 vehicle levels. Half the game is some type of vehicle or minigame. I'll stand by their controls and how they offer up a break from the normal gameplay, but I want to reiterate something that I already said earlier that I think applies to any Crash Bandicoot platformer game. A Crash Bandicoot platformer will always be at its very best when it's Crash Bandicoot platforming. I know this sounds like a very duh moment, but as we go further with this series, you'll come to understand why I needed to make this statement now. In Warped, the vehicles come off just a little too obtrusive. It starts out great, but eventually it starts to weigh on you. It's like you just can't get away from some side activity. Naughty Dog was obviously excited about the vehicles, but they were a bit too overzealous. The vehicles just showed up too often, so it kind of trains you to resent them altogether. Like, be straight with me. Do you really hate Under Pressure? I doubt it. It's a quick underwater level that's really easy to play through and get the gem in one go. Deep Trouble might be pushing it a bit since you need to backtrack for the red gem, but once you're done with it, that's it. No more swimming. I doubt you ever even think about those two levels much at all. Do you really hate Orient Express and Midnight Run? I doubt it. They're two brisk levels that control really well and let you get everything the first time through if you play well enough. Both of these two vehicles I think proves Naughty Dog was really onto something. They both work really well at being the fun break to complement the platforming. Being honest, I've always wished there was a third Pura ride because I think they're so fun. I think that's part of the charm of having two Tiger Ride levels. They were really fun when they showed up and left before you could really think twice about them. Replaying them makes you realize, wow, these are really well-made sections. It's difficult to hate something that doesn't overstay its welcome. But I do bet you hate the motorcycle, because it shows up too much. Now, hate is a strong word. I do think there is a degree of fun here, even if most of that is just seeing Crash in a motorcycle outfit. I think you can inherently get something out of these rides, and playing enough of it, I could see someone getting pretty good at it. And that being said, there really did not need to be 4 separate levels of motorcycle races. That's a bit ridiculous. That's almost an entire warp room's worth of motorcycle. My gosh, imagine a warp room full of jetpack levels. But seriously, Hog Ride, Road Crash, Orange Asphalt, Area 51, I have to ask, why are we driving in the dark? I mean, it's cool, I guess, but the motorcycle just shows up and takes away valuable platforming time. Not to mention, it controls like garbage. It has really slow acceleration. The other drivers can knock you off course and block you, sometimes from ramps or speed pads. The speed pads force you in one direction, making your turns feel extremely tight. Getting the gem in these levels ultimately sucks because you can't turn around to get a box you missed. Even stopping and letting the other drivers go ahead of you so you can have a free track barely helps in breaking all these boxes, because it controls so bad. The motorcycle actually sucks. A vehicle in a similar boat, or should I say similar water, is the jet ski, and frankly I don't know which one's worse. I made such a big case talking up how impressive these jet ski levels are, but there are just too many, and they are by far the longest levels in the game. Something that I've already stated in past videos is a surefire way to make a Crash level annoying is to make it a long level. Random question, but I have to ask, why is one of the secret levels a jet ski level? I do need to admit, hot cocoa is one of the more interesting uses of the jet ski. The end of the level is revealed to you at the beginning, is guarded by some nitro crates. The level is like a scavenger hunt, looking for the nitro switch. It's pretty cool. Unfortunately, hot cocoa and ski craze just don't do it for me overall. That's a shame because there are some of the best looking levels in the game. But with how late they come in the game, playing them makes me wish I was playing something else. And I bet that's the case for a lot of people. It's like the vehicles just feel like they're in the way sometimes. You'll play a really cool platforming level and be like, yeah, that's awesome. Then before you know it, you're in Tell No Tales feeling, They don't ruin the game. Like I said, I enjoyed the majority of them. I think the plane levels are pretty fun. It's just with the sheer total vehicle levels being 50% of the game, it really sours everything. If Naughty Dog could have just pulled that back to maybe just 30%, I think this game would have been completely undeniable. Something else that has always bothered me in Warped are the power-ups, or really how they were implemented. Power-ups act as a fun new way to play through levels. It's really cool to use and combo powers together, but it's very clear to me that power-ups were an afterthought. While I can't outright prove it, sometimes I really think that levels might have been made first and power-ups were thought of later, when ideally the two should have been made in conjunction with each other. Unfortunately, I could almost say for the most part, you could at least beat the game in a base sense without ever using power-ups. It just feels like you have to go out of your way to apply them sometimes. It never really ruined the experience for me, because they're so fun anyways, but it makes it really obvious their inclusion wasn't really needed the moment you get a new one. You go through the first 5 levels without ever encountering a single metal crate, a crate that can only be broken with a body slam. Beat Tiny and go to level 6 Gee Whiz and all of a sudden the game's full of them. It's supposed to be this cool moment when Crash uses his new power, but it's not like we haven't broken metal crates before. They were introducing Crash 2. The regular body slam is more than enough, so the power doesn't really have a purpose. In a similar boat, finish off Dingodile and get the double jump, and for the first time in level 11 Dynamite, there's a pillar way too tall for a normal jump. Now the double jump is a more widely used move throughout the game, so it gets a better reason to exist. Same for the Death Tornado Spin. It takes until Sphinxinator to come across a gap so wide you need the power to cross it. Though it doesn't really help the game's case when you realize the gap is part of a dual pathway. So realistically, you could finish the level without ever using your new power. I get that these are supposed to be moments of soft tutorials on how to apply your new powers, but they end up being some of the only times you need to use your new powers. There just aren't enough times when using these cool upgrades are warranted, and these problems don't arise until a new power is obtained. Like, why is the first time you see a box hovering off the map after you get the bazooka? It'd be a lot cooler if you encountered one before you got the bazooka. You'd see it off in the distance, get really confused, maybe even a little mad, and then leave the level without the gem. You'd continue your playthrough, get the bazooka, use it, then have this aha moment, and could go back and get that box. I mean, yeah, technically it'd be a form of backtracking, but it's not like the series has never done that. Like, be for real, there couldn't have been one tall pillar with a crate on it before level 11. They could have put one anywhere, teasing the player, never truly allowing them to get the gem of that level until you came back with the proper upgrade. It would add so much to your progression throughout the game. Bosses are really improved from the ones in Crash 2. You'd think defeating one and getting a new fun power would mean a lot, but the powers don't really amount to much until after the first credits roll. Just imagine how much of a difference would have been made if powers were used to go back and fix previous problems. All of a sudden, Crash Bandicoot would have these moments when it plays like a Metroidvania. Games that champion backtracking to previous areas once the proper upgrades have been acquired. Instead, powers tend to show up to the player as a new way to fix a problem that was never there. In a sense, new powers bring new problems. Your mileage on that may vary. You could get a new power and just be happy to have it, playing through these levels without a second thought. I guess the argument that Crash Bandicoot games don't need to evoke that much thought anyways is always there. And with how much thought-provoking aspects of Crash that was taken out of Warped, maybe the devs thought the same. Like with enemies. It's like enemies have taken a step forward and then 2 steps back. There's such a wide variety of them now, and they all come with their own entertaining death animation. And as fun as that variety is, when you sit back, you start to realize you deal with every enemy in almost the same way. When Crash 2 introduced its new moveset, one of the most important things that changed was enemies and how you dealt with them. There were creatures in Crash 2 that could only be beaten with slides, creatures that could only be beaten with jumps, and some that needed to be body slammed to break their armor. Warp's enemies do not require any of this. Outside of a very slim number of enemy types, you can defeat pretty much every single one with a spin. I find it really strange that the game that introduced offensive power-ups doesn't have enemies that require their usage. There's not one enemy in the game that needs you to do a super body slam on them, and that feels weird. The Death Tornado Spin really is best used for traversal because there's not a single enemy that can handle more than one spin attack. I guess if you really want to do something different, you can take your bazooka out and blast all the enemies away. There's no stopping that anytime soon. Oddly enough, this bazooka can't even kill this porcupine thing. What's up with that? When you're on monkey bars, you only ever deal with enemies that are on the same level as you. Even though I thought one of the core features of the monkey bars was timing when to pick your legs up to avoid enemies at a lower level. But in Warp, the entire feature is just gone. Picking your legs up isn't gone. It's still in the game, and now it has zero purpose. A completely useless button, just a move left over from Crash 2. You know what I really miss from Crash 2? Where are the secrets? No, I don't mean shooting the Sphinx with the bazooka for extra lives, or jumping on this monkey thing for some stray Wampa fruits. I want the good secrets. You know, jumping on nitro crates, using random boxes to reach what seems like unplayable areas, jumping into chasms that would normally kill you and discovering a whole section of a level, walking through walls in a sewer. I want the good stuff. Crash 2 had this act for making you keep your eyes peeled for anything that even looked kind of suspicious. It taught you to investigate these levels to the fullest. They weren't the hardest things in the world to figure out, but it was just enough to scratch the brain a bit and make the player feel smart when they found them. That's all I'm looking for, and what we got in Warped was insufficient. I got a lot of comments in my Crash 2 video about my experience with the blue gem. It's the only secret in the entire game that I couldn't for the life of me figure out on my own. Apparently, at the end of the level, the counter is supposed to show a 0. Cute. I now want to up the ante and ask, how is a person supposed to realistically find Warp's 2 secrets? Road Crash's alien sign, I may get. Out of all the motorcycle levels, this is the only time there is an alien sign. Even still, that's not really much to go on, and when you do hit it, why do you go to a jet ski level? These two things don't align. I don't see the correlation here between the two, other than them being the worst. But what on earth is the indicator that tells you to go into Dynamite, take the gym path, go to the dinosaur chase, and let the second pterodactyl take you away? If you really know the answer, please share with the class in the comments. I do not believe this is a good secret. Conceptually, it's really cool you get flown to a higher section of the level, but as a secret, it doesn't do it for me at all. A player's best bet is to find this level by sheer luck from actually dying to the right pterodactyl. I know this from experience because that's exactly how I found it when I was a kid. I thought the game crashed because everything went dark when I got flown away. I mean, it was really cool to find this place and earn a gem and a relic at the same time, but after I beat it, I really wanted to play it again. Of course, I couldn't do that because I was a child and wasn't paying attention to what pterodactyl took me in the first place. I think I remember this secret so well, not because I had this awesome eureka moment, but because it was so absurd, I could never forget it. If you ask me, that's not really how you want to handle your secrets. It's like Crash 3 is really good, but it stumbles in the most random places. These trouble spots are all from the developers doing their best to try and evolve and add more, so it's hard to stay mad at it. There's a lot of vehicles because Naughty Dog was really excited about them, so in essence, vehicles became half of the game. Power-ups don't really add much to the base playthrough, probably because they were fun afterthoughts for the developers to play around with. They just threw them in without much thought. Enemies were more focused on all-out variety and bringing life to their animations, so naturally, their mechanical sense took a hit and the way you dealt with them ended up being ordinary. It's hard to fault problems like this when they're all direct results of developers truly pouring their absolute all into their work. Not to mention, they did all this while working in hallways with zero AC in about 10 months. I don't need to completely go into that story. These days, most people already know it. But let's just agree, Universal Studios weren't the nicest people ever. Kinda makes me sad in retrospect that one of my favorite video games ever was made in such a malicious work environment. The irony is that the game that the developers had the most fun making was made in the worst conditions. It's weird, but it makes me love Crash Warp even more, even when the odds were stacked against the game, even with all the game's little problems. It's still one of the best games to come back to and keep playing.
Crash, Coco, if you have already retrieved a level's crystal, then you will find a floating clock when you enter for the second time. This floating clock activates time trial mode. Grab it and the clock will start ticking. Race for the end to get the best time. But beware, some elements will change.
If you know my Crash videos, then you know by now the video would normally be over. But in the same way Crash Warp keeps going after the first credits, I still have more to say. Lucky you, am I right? Crash 3 is the first game in this series that really took the post-game seriously. Crash 1 didn't really have a post-game at all. You essentially just went through every level up to the lab, then turned around to clean everything up. Pretty much the same for Crash 2, except if you play the game right, you'll have 100% the same time you defeat Cortex. Probably another reason why more people gravitate to 2 more often. It's a cleaner playthrough. Crash 3 is the first time in the series that to truly collect everything, you need to defeat Cortex and let the first credits roll. Let me tell you why this is genius. When you first defeat Cortex and get the super shoes, you watch one of the most unsatisfying conclusion cutscenes. Cortex wallows in their loss for a bit, but Uka Uka is still raring to go. As those two jump back into the time twister with the credits rolling, it's very obvious that you're not finished. You might have beat them at the Crystal game, but the race for the gems has officially started. And so yes, you need to go back through the game and collect every gem from every level. Initially, the task doesn't seem that daunting. Go back to a level you missed, make sure to comb through the level for every single box, collect the gems, and be done. This method will work up to a point. Obviously, you need all the color gems to visit their respective paths. The majority of those you probably picked up your first time through in levels like Deep Trouble and Tomb Time. The gold gem in Hang 'em High is floating in the back and it's pretty unclear on how to get it, so you move on to other gems. You get every single gem you can, look at your gem total, and you hit a wall. There's simply not enough gems available for you to hit the 42 total. The gold gem is still a huge mystery, and no matter how many times you replay Future Frenzy, you can't seem to find those missing crates. It's like they're non-existent. Where does that leave you? Well, it's time to do some time trials. Time trials are one of my favorite additions in Crash Warp. I think this method of going back through each level with every power is the most fun part of the game. It's time to become a speedrunner and show mastery of these levels you've already been through. You essentially need to complete each level without dying as fast as you can. Your time is broken up into 3 tiers. Sapphire relics will not let you see the true ending of the game, but it's a nice benchmark to show that you're on the right path. Gold relics are the bar you need to reach. They all mark the minimum time the developers decided every level should realistically be beaten at. And platinum relics are the mark of a true master. Getting a plat means you're a cut above the rest. You've gone above the developer's expectations. You have true bragging rights. But it doesn't stop there because relics offer up so much replayability. Maybe you find a level's run that you're really good at, so you keep at it. You continue to optimize that time. Each successful run leaving your initials showing off your new high score. Maybe you have a competitive sibling who sees your time and initials and decides there's no way your initials are going over theirs, so they destroy your time just to leave theirs on top of yours. Maybe you two are playing the same levels, going back to back, taking turns trying to one-up each other. You could start a contest seeing who get the most best times on all the levels. Before either of you even knew it, Crash 3 is basically an arcade game at your house. Playing for a new high scores, leaving your initials, bragging a bit. Essentially, Crash 3 just became a game you can come back to and play whenever you want. Even if one day you manage to get every platinum relic, there'll still be times that could be optimized even more, not even including the developer times. There will still be a reason to plop that disc back into your PS1 and fire up some Crash Warp. Naughty Dog crafted a game mode inside the parameters of a platformer that warrants play way beyond the runtime of a normal playthrough, and it's the first time I ever experienced a post-game like this, or really a post-game at all, to be honest. I used to outright hate the time trials. I sucked at them, so in essence, getting relics wasn't something I never really enjoyed, because I couldn't earn them. But the more I kept at it, the more I became better at controlling Crash. I became better at using his powers effectively. I started understanding the concept of lines when trying to optimize movement. I started paying attention to my usage of mass. Turns out they're very important. It truly became an addicting loop playing a level over and over again until I had a time I was satisfied with. It makes for one of Crash 3's greatest strengths, and it's really cool it's not opened up to you until you beat the base game. Now, obviously, some people won't see relics the same way I do, and I completely understand. Replaying levels over and over again could have just as well have the opposite effect. Some people might not even see the point. Though, it's not like you be doing it for nothing. Getting relics is the natural step for progression. Get 5 relics of any rank, and in the middle of the time twister, a platform appears. It turns out, underneath the time twister, there's 5 more buttons, each locked behind a rising cost of relics. If you truly want a shot at Cortex and Uka Uka one more time, you need to get every relic in the game. It turns the post-game into this really cool back and forth of sweating for time trials, going back to old levels for gems, going into Hang'em High's secret entrance to nab the gold gem, using the gold gem for more pathways, which will unlock other gems. You unlock brand new levels like Area 51 and Rings of Power. Those are probably 2 of the weirdest levels in the game. Are we really having an airplane race? You do so much, you collect everything, and each time Crash and Coco come out of portals, smiling, pulling out whatever collectibles they have, throwing it up in the air. Each time watching Crash do his little victory dance, you constantly check that percentage as it slowly inches closer and closer until you come out of that last level, gem in hand, and watch Crash do his victory dance one last time. You start to realize something. The buttons have all but vanished. You can check anywhere, not a single button. You already know where you need to go. Cortex and Uka Uka are challenging you one last time. Their single button beckons for you. You jump in, knowing this will truly decide the fate of the world.
Yes, it is true. The Bandicoot has brought all of the crystals and all of the gems to me. Ultimate power is mine. The world as we know it is about to end.
Now, of course, it does play identical to the first boss fight, but the theming and the stakes makes the fight all the grander. You fight Cortex and Uka Uka one more time to end off a trilogy. A trilogy of games that I love so dearly. A trilogy of games that always push to make each new experience different, innovative, and fun. A trilogy of platformers that offer up something that I cannot get anywhere else. You know, I used to play Crash 3 and get sad. This is the defining end to an era. This is the last Naughty Dog Crash Bandicoot platformer. I used to always ask, why did it have to end? Why couldn't Naughty Dog take Crash with them into the next generation?
Why did Universal have to be the people they were and treat my favorite developers so terribly? Why couldn't the show just go on? Why? I remember as a kid, I'd always play new Crash games. The games would always start up and I'd be confused. I would always look for the little red paw print and it'd never be there. I wasn't the smartest kid. The idea of studios never really clicked for me, but I knew something was missing. I still played the other Crash games and enjoyed them for what they were, though it was very obvious something was different. And no matter how many I played, how many times I begged my mom to buy me the new Crash Bandicoot game, no matter how many hours I spent in each one, there would always be a time, at least once a year, I'd come back and play this trilogy. As I got older and had the ability to actually do my own research, I learned about Naughty Dog, read how the character Crash Bandicoot came to be, started paying more attention to how the gameplay was crafted with purpose, learning how big of a deal Crash 1's conception even was. I started to truly understand how special the games I already liked were, and that made this trilogy all the sweeter. Nowadays, I'm much different. I don't ask why anymore. I do not focus on what could have been, because I will always have what is. The trilogy is always here for me. I can always sit back, turn it on, and blast through and still have fun. I'd say these days, after writing and reflecting on these games so much, I appreciate them even more. They've aged like fine wine, and for me personally, Crash Warped is the best example of that. You know, it's hard for me to talk about Crash Warped and not get melancholic. I'm writing this out on a cold winter's night. I have Crash 3 on my monitor to the right, the Warp Room theme blaring in my ears, Crash standing there playing with his yo-yo. It's hard not to reminisce. I always make an effort to fight that Crash Bandicoot is more than nostalgia, but I'd be lying if I didn't share the sentiment even a little bit. Playing this game always takes me back to a simpler time. A time when I could come home from school on a Friday night, race upstairs and fire up the PS2 so I could play Crash 3 on it. My brother and I would swap the controller back and forth as we played a game we'd already beaten so many times before. Sometimes even my parents would grab the controller. What a weird thing to think back on. I still play the game today, alone usually, typically in my own comfort while watching a YouTube video. I still enjoy these moments with the game, but man, where's the time gone? I'm not that old, but even still, playing Crash 3 transports me back to a time when I could really bond with the people I love through a game. A silly little, wonderfully made game. This is the end of a trilogy, but it's not the end of Crash. Not even close. This Bandicoot and his team of friends still had more to do and so much more to accomplish. The first thing on that huge list for them to do was to learn how to race. Thank you so much for watching this video. I put a lot of work into these Crash videos. If you couldn't already tell, it's my favorite game series, so each video means a lot. I spend so much time writing and redrafting my scripts for this series, so I really do appreciate that you can sit through it. I guess I can say certainly that this retrospective series will continue, which means I finally get to write about a Crash game that isn't a platformer. Can't wait. Until that time comes, I urge you to watch my other 2 Crash retrospectives if you haven't already. I promise I put the same amount of love into those videos as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, comment down below your favorite part, favorite level, or vehicle you hate the most. I'm sure you got one. If you didn't enjoy the video, comment anyway. Tell me what you hated. I would just love to have some people discussing some good old Crash Bandicoot. My name's Yorm, and I really do hope you get a chance to play a game you enjoyed today.
Defeated again! This is not fair! Maybe I should retire to a nice big beach with a nice big drink and a woman with nice big bags of ice for my head.